what happened with Rachmaninoff? Um, like many artists, especially Jewish artists, but white Russian and upper class, well-educated people, he was trapped and had to leave desperately quickly in the winter of 1918 when the Russian Revolution came, the Bolshevik Revolution. His country house, Ivanovka, where he had spent over 25 summers and invested all of his money, was taken over by Bolsheviks and he lost everything. He simply had to walk away from it. Fortunately, after the October Revolution, he received an invitation to play a series of 20 concerts in Scandinavia. So he used that as an excuse to leave the country with his family in December. And they got out, and they ended up in Sweden on Christmas Eve looking for a hotel with one suitcase and one satchel with manuscripts in it. I mean, they had to look like they were going to come back, so they couldn't take anything. He lost all his money, he lost his property, and then began rebuilding a career. He was 44 years old at the peak of his career as a conductor and a composer and a pianist. He had to start over to support his family as a concert pianist. And that's why we have the legacy of all those tours and the concerts and eventually ending up in the United States. But for a while, he had a haven. He had earned enough money to buy a beautiful piece of property in Switzerland, Lake Lucerne, Switzerland. And he built a house designed there. It's called Senar, Senar for Serge and Natalie Rachmaninoff. And in the 30s, that was a very happy time. They created it as a kind of little Russia on the lake, and you had Russian customs of tea and Russian servants and all the Russian guests coming and going. But guess what? World War II, 1938, and he has to flee again and abandon that house because it's too dangerous to stay. And then they ended up in the United States again. So this is a common story. There's a wonderful book about that, which I will hold up for you to see, called Artists in Exile. And some dear colleagues, and I did a concert on this theme a few years ago, Mark Nyworth, who's on today, and Catherine Edison. And it tells the story of how those refugees from wars and revolutions transformed the American performing arts, because America was a haven for many of them. There's also a wonderful video. I love this video called, let's see, it's pretty glary there, Harvest of Sorrow. It features the orchestra of the Mariinsky Theater Orchestra and Chorus, conducted by Valery Gergiev, who's a graduate of the St. Petersburg Conservatory and one of the top conductors in the world. Rachmaninoff's letters and other reminiscences spoken by Sir John Gielgud. This is an excellent, excellent documentary, and the script is entirely Rachmaninoff's own words taken from his letters. So I can highly recommend that. And then someone's asking about my teacher. I showed you a picture at the very end of our presentation. How's that possible? I never went to the St. Petersburg Conservatoire, but my teacher, Alla Doxerhoff, was a 20-year-old graduate of the St. Petersburg Conservatoire in 1917 when the revolution came. She was newly married, pregnant, and her husband was an imperial naval officer who had been imprisoned by the Bolsheviks. Fortunately, he was much beloved by his men, and they engineered an escape. So in March of 1918, she and her husband and her mother left. They had to cross a frozen lake in a Model A Ford. They could take one suitcase. Her father had disappeared. He was a doctor and had been abducted by the White Russian army to go with the troops closer to the front. And they had to dress in servants' clothes. They were clearly upper-class people. Her mother taught physics at the Women's University in St. Petersburg. She had been a voice and piano major, had been taught by private tutors, was fluent in French and German, very well educated. Here they are in servants' clothes, and they ended up taking the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Shanghai, where they spent the next 8 years trying to get visas to US or to Canada. Finally, the Canadian one came through, and they went to Canada. She spent another 5 years in Vancouver, where she worked playing for the silent movies in the Orpheum Theater. And because of her French, they thought she had a wonderful cultured accent. She could get a job in a beauty salon shampooing women's heads because she could speak French and maybe teaching a few piano students. These were desperate times. So eventually she ended up in California. They finally got the American visas and they decided to leave Canada and come to the US. And that's where I met her in 1959. And here's this brilliant, educated woman teaching piano lessons for $2 an hour. So I rode my bike to her house with the $2 in my pocket, and she changed my life. There's no other way to say it. She changed my life. So those Russian artists, all those immigrants, transformed Western culture, American culture in particular. You should follow up on that. There was one other question about Rimsky-Korsakov being in the Navy. Yes, his family had a long history of military service and being in the Imperial Navy. All those guys in the group of five, Borodin and Balakirev, they were all civil servants, chemistry professors, naval officers. Rimsky-Korsakov had been in New York Harbor in 1863 during the American Civil War on a Russian ship as a midshipman. And he continued when he started teaching composition at the St. Petersburg Conservatoire in 1927. He was 27 years old. He went there in the 1860s, late 60s, early 70s. He had to wear the military uniform to teach his music classes because that was the rule. You were considered to be always on duty. So he taught composition classes in his naval uniform. These were talented, well-educated people who had incredible side careers, hobbies, we would call it today, a side interest, which they developed to an extraordinary degree. So it's the easiest way to find out about them is just go to Wikipedia and look up Rimsky-Korsakov biography. And it's fascinating reading. You'll find out everything that you want to know. What else? I showed you the videos. Okay. And then Debussy, if you want to know a very good book, the best biography right now I found is this one. Let me see. But there are many on the market, and that one's a very thick, very thorough one. This one is more like an amateur's introduction to Debussy on the Faden collection by Paul Roberts. Debussy by Paul Roberts, also very excellent and a little shorter, a little bit lighter weight. This one is about 200 pages. So this would be a good place to start if you want to jump in. So let's jump in. Debussy, like Chopin and like Rachmaninoff, was a person who stubbornly had his own ideas and believed in himself, to the great irritation of his teachers, who were constantly trying to squeeze him into the mold of what was considered standard practice of the time. He gave his teachers at the conservatoire fits because he told them, there's no rules. The only rule in music is pleasure. And after all, music can't be taught. It's something that you feel. It's something that's innate and that's an instinct. So some of his teachers enjoyed the fact that they had a rebel in their class who was trying out all kinds of new chord progressions and new sounds, and others just couldn't give him the time of day. Thought this guy's a waste of time and he's nothing but a troublemaker. He fortunately landed with a wonderful piano teacher. His first teacher was a woman who claimed to be a student of Chopin. He was a child who had been taken out of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. It wasn't safe. So Mama took him down to Cannes to be with his Aunt Clementine on the Riviera, where it would be safe. And at that time, he just started picking out tunes and trying chords on the piano. And she said, this boy has an ear, he's talented. So they found a teacher for him. And it was this woman, Madame Motet de Fleurville, who claimed to have been a student of Chopin. There's some serious doubt cast on that now, but many people claimed to have been students of Chopin because it gave them not only cachet, but some kind of credibility as teachers. But she did do a pretty decent job, and she was so impressed with him, she gave him free lessons the whole time he was there and prepared him quickly enough that he could enter the Paris Conservatoire when he was 10 years old. They only accepted 8 students out of a group of 38 applicants. So that tells you something. And then he landed with Antoine Marmontel, who had actually been someone who knew Chopin, had heard him play, and who owned the Delacroix portrait of Chopin that was made in 1838. That was in his possession, and that is the one that is now in the Louvre. Leslie, let's quickly go to the images and just show you the pictures of these people before we move on to the middle of his life, the early part of his life. I have some delightful photos to show you. Okay, there's baby Claude, 5, 6 years old, and then 15 years old. Next one. This is Madame Motet de Fleurville, the little oval portrait, and her daughter, interesting enough, had the misfortune to marry Paul Verlaine, the symbolist poet, whose poems Debussy set to music, many of his poems. Of course, she had the very sad marriage because Verlaine ran off with Rimbaud and had a wild affair. And then they both wrote incredible poetry about all of that. But look at the connections here. I mean, this woman claims to have been connected to Chopin. She teaches Debussy, and then Debussy grows up and sets the poems of Paul Verlaine, who's married to her daughter. Okay, next one. There's the teacher, Antoine Marmontel, very distinguished and a kind man, I think, a generous and a kind man, not someone who was cloning students, but letting them develop and letting them find the path that was appropriate for them. And he was so proud of owning this portrait of Delacroix. I think it had already been dismembered by this time, and Georges Sand had been cut out of it, and somebody else had bought the Georges Sand half, and that ended up in Denmark, as far as I can remember. Okay, next one. There's conservatoire years. Debussy is playing for the composer Chausson and some family and some admirers. They spent all the weekends making music and talking about music, living music, going to cafes. One more, and then I think yeah, these are the years of the Prix de Rome. Debussy tried several times. This was the big prize given by the Paris Conservatoire in composition, and it meant a 2-year scholarship to go to Rome and concentrate on composition and write things. It's kind of like a postdoc or doctorate, where you would have a task to complete a certain amount of work and present it, and then to be fully graduated. And this beautiful portrait was done of him at that time. Now he went, but he hated it. He felt trapped, and it took forever for him to finish the projects. He procrastinated, and what he really loved doing was wandering around Rome to the Oriental antique shops, where he started collecting his objets d'art and Japanese woodblock prints. My kind of guy. Okay, next one. There's the mature Debussy. Okay. Looking very stylish. He loved the best of everything. He dressed well. The best tailor, even in the conservatoire days when they had no money and they were just dirt poor. If they went out to a cafe together, most of the students would look for like special today, three for one, kind of thing, the special clearance. No, not Debussy. He bought the single most expensive item on the menu and enjoyed it thoroughly. Okay, one more picture. There he is at his desk with, you can almost make out the Oriental objet d'art. There's a ceramic man lying on his side with the inkwell, and then there's a wooden frog. It's about 6 inches high, just beyond his shoulder there, and that always stayed on his desk. And he told his wife, do not move that frog. He gets upset if you move him. And on the walls were the Japanese woodblock prints. Okay, one more. And of course, he owned this print of Hokusai's Great Wave. And when he wrote La Mer, he put it on the cover. and his own insignia, this Claude Debussy, his CD thing looks like a Japanese seal, the way he designed it. Okay, one more. This is wonderful. There's the Japanese woodblock prince, the Great Wave, and one of Utamaro's geishas. Stravinsky's 20 years younger. Stravinsky came to Paris when he was the rising star, and he worshipped Debussy. And they went to the opera together one time. And so he gets up the nerve to ask him, well, what did you think of my Firebird? And Debussy said, well, you have to start somewhere. I love that. That kind of honesty. But there was tremendous mutual respect there, clearly. Next one. Satie, great friends. They had known each other for 30 years and remained friends. Satie fell out with almost everybody, but he remained friends with Debussy. And he was also dirt poor, living in this room with no plumbing and no heat, and walking to the cafes to play the piano in the bars in Montmartre and writing his music. One writer described him as someone who has 13 letters in an alphabet and is trying to create his own literature. He didn't have the depth of musical education that the others did. He was just going by instinct and what sounded good to him. I'll play you some fragments of his early pieces, and they had a profound influence on both Debussy and Ravel. And there's a wonderful silent movie. I mean, it's a silent movie, but it has music that he did in 1924, which we found on YouTube, called Entr'acte, which is kind of a slapstick, funny thing about a funeral. You should check that out. It is really fun, and that shows Satie at his best, at his most playful and most creative. Okay, next one. Satie at the harmonium, beautiful oil portrait by Rossignol. Okay, and one more. Satie's fantastic calligraphy. He wrote these art letters, and there's a book called Sport et Divertissement, Sports and Diversions, which is a series of fashion spreads, things like tennis and golf and dancing the tango, and with his choreography and a short piece of music to accompany each image by this magazine fashion illustrator. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And that's the second Mrs. Debussy. This letter is written to her, Emma Bardac. Emma Bardac had been the wife of a wealthy banker, older man, and also had been a serious mistress of Gabriel Fauré for many years. And then her son was taking composition lessons with Debussy. And she and Debussy hooked up. Debussy left his wife, which caused a tremendous scandal because his friends sympathized with her. She had been abandoned, Rosalie Texier. She was abandoned, Lily, and she tried to kill herself. She shot herself, but she recovered, but she was poor. And so people like Ravel chipped in and helped support her through the crisis of the abandonment. And that turned some of them against Debussy because they had the feeling that perhaps he had married for money. But what happened was when she divorced, her husband divorced her, she didn't get any of his money. So they actually had to live off of what Debussy was making. Okay, another one. Oh, dear Ravel, with the cats. They both love cats. Debussy and Ravel adored cats, and Debussy let them wander all over his desk. Even if he wouldn't let his wife dust and move his things, he let the cat up there to lounge around when he was working. And Ravel was his younger, 12 years younger than Debussy. Again, was a firm admirer. And I have some beautiful quotes from Ravel supporting Debussy. There was a newspaper critic who wrote an article when the Orchestral Nuage came out, criticizing them, saying that these are really has-been, nobody cares about this kind of music anymore. They also, both Ravel and Debussy, hated the term impressionism as applied to them. They were not comfortable with that, and they didn't feel it was accurate or appropriate. What they were doing was symbolist representation, not representation, but suggestion, mere suggestion. And Ravel was much more of a classicist and less of a symbolist. Ravel adored the Image for orchestra and generously proclaimed as much in an article after the first complete performance in 1913. 1913, that's also the year of Le Sacre du Printemps, and the Titanic had gone down the year before. World War I is heating up, and Debussy writes these beautiful Images for orchestra, three pieces. One critic wrote that it was only writers and painters who still admired Debussy, whereas musicians and sensitive listeners had grown tired of him. Ravel was so angry by this, he wrote back and to a letter to the editor and to be published in the newspaper, and wrote, "So you who have felt the remarkable enchantment and exquisite freshness of Rond de Printemps," that's one of the movements of the Nuage, "you who have been moved to tears by the flowing quality of Iberia, by the profoundly moving Les Parfums de la Nuit, by the harmonic richness, so original and delicate, by all of that intense musicality, you're nothing but a writer or a painter, and you fully understand the contempt that these terms convey. I, too, am only a writer or a painter, and with me, Monsieur Igor Stravinsky, Florent Schmidt, Roger Ducasse, Albert Roussel, and a host of young composers whose output, however, is not negligible." So this was wonderful support to contradict that bad review. Debussy also got tied up with the Ballet Russe and Serge Diaghilev, his wonderful piece, L'Afternoon of a Faun, which was revolutionary and completely transformed music. And Ravel said, when asked, what music would you want played at your funeral, Ravel said, The Afternoon of a Faun. It's the only most perfect piece, completely perfect piece that's ever been written. He adored that music and said so. Diaghilev got tied up with Debussy, and they choreographed it. Nijinsky choreographed it much later. It was 1912. And this became a scandal because they didn't take it as symbolist, suggestive. They made it absolutely literal and scandalous and vulgar because of Nijinsky's shuddering orgasm on the stage at the climax of this ballet. So people booed and they threw stuff, and Debussy was angry and indignant and felt that he'd made a huge mistake letting them take his piece and cover it this way, to have it be hijacked and desecrated by them. But he, in a letter to a friend, he explains how he got involved in this thing. These are Debussy's words. How did it happen? Well, because one must eat. And because one day I dined with Serge de Diaghilev, a terrible but irresistible man who could even make stones dance. He spoke to me of a scenario devised by Nijinsky, made up of the subtle, sweet nothings which I suppose should always form the basis of a ballet. So he got sweet talked into it and decided it had been nothing but a huge, huge, huge mistake. Let's go ahead and finish the slides. We have a couple more. There he is at the beach in Pourville, 1915. By this time, Debussy was quite ill. He had a terrible colon cancer that had been treated, and the symptoms first appeared in 1909, and then they were treated off and on, but it got worse and worse and worse. So he didn't write much in the last years of his life. He did write one piece for two pianos called En Blanc et Noir, and dedicated it to Stravinsky. So they were friends. Next picture, it's Debussy and his daughter with Emma Bardac, Claude Emma. He wrote the Children's Corner Suite for her with all the English titles and dressed her in English clothes. That was the height of fashion in those days, English fashion. He's quite ill at this time. And sadly, she only survived him by another year. He died on this date, March 25th, 1918, as the Germans were shelling Paris. This man who had lived all his life to create a music which was completely anti-German, anti-Wagner, anti-Teutonic, which would be purely French, has to die while the long-range German guns are shelling Paris and even destroyed his neighborhood church, Saint-Gervais, where he had often gone to hear the choir sing Renaissance counterpoint with Palestrina and Orlando Gibbons. So terrible, terrible time for him to die. And then Claude Emma contracted diphtheria and died a year later. And they are buried together with his wife in the Cimetière de Passy. Next slide. He was first in Père Lachaise and then was moved to Passy. And he wrote his own epitaph. And all it says is musicien français, French musician. He was so completely dedicated to a French identity and preserving that French heritage. At the end, here's another nice letter to Durand, his publisher, near the end of his life. He had a little burst of good health, and he says, I've been writing like a madman, or anyway, like a man condemned to die the next morning. Certainly, I haven't forgotten the war during these 3 months. Indeed, I've come to see the horrible necessity of it. What a sad lesson for us. Indeed, I don't just mean the concrete emplacements and the two-way espionage. That's awful, I agree. I'm talking about the heavy hand laid on our thoughts and our structures and accepted with a careless smile. There's the serious damage. Impossible to forgive and difficult to repair because it's inside us, like tainted blood. So what about French music? Where are our old harpsichordists who produced real music in abundance? They held the secret of that graceful profundity, that emotion without epilepsy, which we shy away from like ungrateful children. That comment, that emotion without epilepsy, he's talking about German excess, Sturm und Drang, which starts with Beethoven, storming the heavens, and goes with Liszt and then Wagner and all of that school. And he says, calm down. It reminds me, I mean, this is so inappropriate, but it reminds me of that scene in Blazing Saddles, that gloriously now politically inappropriate movie, which could never be made. I adore Mel Brooks. There's a scene where the beautiful black sheriff dressed in Gucci leathers with the Gucci saddle has spent a night with the German spy, Madeleine Kahn. And she's throwing a fit because he's leaving. She's holding onto his leg and he's trying to leave and dragging her across the floor. She holds on her leg and she's wailing and making a display. And he says, you're making a Teutonic excess of yourself. Stop it. This is too much. So that is the same point of view that Debussy had towards the German musicians, especially Wagner and the Wagnerian opera, that he was trying to create a French school which was cool and elegant and poised and full of profundities, but a serenely calm, elegant kind of music. Not that Teutonic spectacle of yourself. You're making a Teutonic spectacle. Anyway, okay, sorry, couldn't help that. All right, now I'd like to play some music for you. So let's go back. I have lots of excerpts, many short excerpts, and a few complete pieces to take you through this list. I hope you have it in front of you, the handout, which has a great deal of his repertoire and the dates, the composition dates. So if you follow along, you'll be in good shape here with the handout. Of course, starting with Fauré, I mean, you realize all those genres of Fauré are genres that were made popular by Chopin, the barcarolles, the nocturnes, the valses. So that's continuing that tradition. Satie, of course, Mr. Precursor. I have some wonderful stuff to play for him. And Ravel, and then mostly Debussy today. So I'll move to the piano now. And we're going to start with a mazurka, of all things, that Debussy wrote. He went to Moscow twice when he was traveling with the von Mecks, Madame Nadezhda von Meck, who was Tchaikovsky's confidant. and had 11 children and was impossibly wealthy. And so in the summertime, she hired a piano trio from the conservatoire to travel with her and teach her children and keep them entertained both. So Debussy had this gig where he had a piano trio and taught lessons and was free to compose in the summer and traveled with this family. So here's this beautiful little mazurka. Look at that calligraphy. Isn't that gorgeous? From those years where he was traveling, I'm just going to play the opening of it so you can see, with the Von Mix. Now, next, the lovely first and second arabesque. Those arabesques, they're early, they're student pieces, but it shows the influence of Chopin particularly. I suspect that Debussy played those little Trois Nouvelles Etudes that I played for you maybe 2 weeks ago, which are anti-virtuosic and feature cross rhythms. There's a lovely, I played the F minor, which is a 3 against 4, and then the A flat major, 2 against 3. And Debussy's first arabesque plays with the cross rhythms exactly like those little etudes. So here's a bit of the first arabesque. Second arabesque is more decorative. It has like a little ornament figure, which he just repeats like a little mordant ornament figure. And another student piece, the early Reverie, which is kind of like a Chopin nocturne. But what's interesting here is, again, the rhythmic displacement and lots of cross rhythms. It's sweet. This is extremely early, like a student work. Now, what's next? Okay. That reverie, I feel like that's like the warm up for Claire de Lune. And there's a wonderful writing by Debussy's teacher, Momontel, which which really shows what Debussy's aesthetic emphasis was. I mean, he was all about beautiful sound. The technique should be, I mean, he had almost a virtuosic technique, but you should never display any struggle. There's nothing heroic about it. You do it effortlessly, as Chopin did, effortlessly. Marmontel wrote books about pianists and pianism, and his references to Chopin read uncannily like a commentary on the music of Debussy. This is Marmontel. If we draw a parallel between Chopin's sound effects and certain techniques of painting, we could say that this great virtuoso modulated sound much as skilled painters treat light and atmosphere, to envelop melodic phrases and ingenious arabesques in a half tint, which has something of both dream and reality. This is the pinnacle of art. And this was Chopin's art. Wow, Debussy landed with the right teacher. I mean, that was incredibly lucky. So here's Claire de Lune, everybody's favorite. Okay. Now, right at this time, Debussy makes a huge breakthrough with Prelude à l'après-midi d'un faune. And I just happen to have this ancient piano transcription of it. Look at this. This is the seal, which looks like a Japanese seal. You must know this piece. This is one of the most glorious things in the entire history of music. And Ravel was right. It is a perfect, beautiful piece. And it would be fantastic to have it played at your funeral. But you don't have to. You can just go and listen to it. There's any number of wonderful interpreters. This is an amazing thing. The way he uses the orchestra is spectacular, and the structure of the piece is something new, but it's a virtuosic treatment. Let me just play the very beginning. It's a flute solo. It starts completely this naked flute solo, and then the harps and the horn and the whole orchestra comes in, and the chords are wonderful. So I'm just going to play the opening because it's fun. I think it is the most seductive, erotic piece of music that ever been written, but it's not descriptive. It's suggestive, and it's powerful. But I can understand why Debussy was so furious when Nijinsky took it and made a literal, vulgar choreography of that. It should be just completely suggestive. So pour yourself a glass of wine tonight and listen listen to this. It's spectacularly beautiful erotic music. What else? Now moving on to Satie and Ravel and Chopin. Um, the Satie Gymnopédie. They're these funny little simple pieces that Satie wrote, and he needed money. He was really struggling. Debussy helped him out by orchestrating two of them, the first and the third, and playing them in a concert. And so Satie got both recognition and a little bit of money, and they were published. And then Ravel also, I think there's a connection here. See what you think. I'm going to play a little bit of a Chopin waltz. This is the waltz in A minor, opus 34. It's marked lento, slowly. Most of these waltzes are in tempo giusto. They're quick, they're kind of brilliant, and they're frothy salon pieces. This one is not. This one is another creature altogether. So I'm going to play three little things for you. A bit of the Chopin waltz, the A minor, then the opening of the first Gymnopédie that Debussy orchestrated, and then a bit of the slow movement of the Ravel piano concerto. I think you'll see these pieces are all cousins. They're all beautiful, and they're cousins. There is a thread connecting them all. So first the Chopin. you never want it to end. That's so beautiful. Satie was so advanced in his harmonic experiments and explorations, way ahead of Ravel and Debussy. Here's a sarabande he wrote in 1887 that's dedicated to Ravel. Listen to these chords. They're shocking. I have to go slowly to read it because there's about a zillion double sharps, and he wrote it in F sharp major. Look at this. There's a zillion sharps, and then there's double sharps all over the place. So I'll try. You wouldn't know if I played a wrong note, but I'm going to try really hard to play the right notes because they're astonishing. So a little bit of that sarabande, and then I also have the sarabande of Debussy from Pour le Piano. They were reaching back to the French clavecin school of Couperin and Rameau, and this homage to the French tradition as against being swamped by German music and Wagnerism, right? So this is part of this French national movement, but his chords are out of this world. Okay, so first, Eric Satie. Debussy. Debussy. What's next? Okay. Now, an interesting experiment. Many writers claim that Debussy played all those big Chopin pieces when he was at the conservatoire as his examination pieces. He was obsessed with it, and then later in life, during World War II, he started editing the complete works of Chopin so that there could be a French edition, because the German editions of Breitkopf were no longer available because of the war. So not only had he been immersed in Debussy as a student, and also then in midlife, at the end of his life, again with editing the complete works. Some writers claim that the Debussy L'Île Joyeuse would not exist without the Chopin barcarolle, both in the kind of the plan of the piece and the devices that are used to develop the melody. Now, Chopin does what we call as apotheosize melodies. First it'll appear as just a slender little thread, and then it comes back with gigantic chords fortissimo, like full orchestra. So there is that, and there's also this figure in the bass of the barcarolle, which Debussy he transforms completely for the very end of L'Île Joyeuse. So I'll play you a bit of the opening, especially, so listen to the left hand of the opening of the barcarolle, and then I'll play you this ending of the L'Île Joyeuse. They don't sound alike, but but there is a connection there. So this will be a little tougher to hear. So remember. Now listen to this. This is preceded by this huge apotheosis of the theme. So so that's lifted right out of the barcarolle. Okay. All right. Where are we getting to? Étam. Oh, the lovely étam. Étam means print, as in woodblock print. Étam. And after that, the Universal Exposition of 1889, Debussy heard the gamelan orchestras from Bali and Java, and it was fascinating. He went back over and over to hear them perform, and he loved that sound. He wrote pieces imitating that sound of the gamelan orchestra with the pentatonic scales and the whole tone scales and all that. And these pieces also, these still have descriptive titles. You know, it's not exactly program music. Again, it's supposed to be suggestive, not descriptive. So the three pieces are pagodas, the Soirée dans Grenada, at sunset, and Gardens in the Rain. And they're like postcards of a very exotic landscape, each one of them. So I'm just play the beginning of the pagodas for you, so you can hear some of that Orientalism. It's a habanera rhythm, actually. And then the Gardens in the Rain is a little toccata. It's this kind of thing, very dry. On, toccata with the fingers interlocked like that. Gardens in the Rain. Okay, and then where are we up to? Reflet dans l'eau. The images for piano are exquisite. Again, they have the descriptive titles like a painting for the image. And this is what really people think of as impressionist music. But again, it comes out of a little bit of the, he heard Liszt play Au bord d'une source at the edge of a stream in Rome when he was there for the Prix de Rome. And everybody's writing water pieces, and water is the most perfect medium for impressionist paintings. Think of all the Monet water lilies and the seascapes. And so Debussy wrote this gorgeous Reflections in the Water piece from the Image. I'll play the whole thing for you, not just a fragment. Whew. Okay. Okay. Oh, right. Getting close to the end. The piano preludes. I want to play you some of the preludes. This first book of preludes is amazing. They were revolutionary, and of course, he wrote 24 as an homage both to Bach and to Chopin. 24 preludes. He also wrote 12 etudes dedicated to the memory of Chopin. So I think our boy Debussy was deeply immersed and in love with the music and all of the aesthetic of Chopin his entire life. Let me play you some little bits from the Preludes Book 1, just to show you. Some of them are like postcards. They're all wonderful, colorful, and completely different. I'd like to play you a bit of the sounds and scents of the evening air. The Hills of Anacapri is an Italian postcard. Footsteps in the Snow. These all sound like Japanese woodblock prints. The Girl with the Flaxen Hair, you know that. Oh, and I have, just to show you, I have a facsimile copy of the manuscript. This is a beautiful thing. This is it. Debussy Book 1 Prelude. Look at how meticulous, how fine, how meticulous. This is The Girl with the Flaxen Hair, the manuscript. It's exquisite. Talk about Satie's calligraphy. This is minimalist, beautiful, perfect, precise, so meticulous. A perfectionist at work. You can learn so much just by looking at that score. Okay, so here we go. Preludes, and I'll end up with the Engulfed Cathedral. I'll play you the whole cathedral. I think if I just do a fraction of those first four, and then I'll have time to do the whole submerged cathedral for you. Okay. Italian one, and then footsteps in the snow. And then who's next? Oh, flaxen hair. And that only takes you through a fraction of the preludes. I would recommend you listen to all of book one. Become familiar with them. They're wonderful. It is like walking through a gallery. If you want to make the comparison with Impressionist painters, it's like walking through a gallery of 12 gorgeous images. Okay, folks, we've come to the end. Thank you for coming with me on this journey, exploring the whole story of Chopin, his life, his history, his legacy, and how he continues to be the most popular composer. So many of his contemporaries are largely forgotten and hardly played anymore, but everything that Chopin wrote is still in the repertoire and still being enjoyed by millions of people every day. So